members of the public, if you're interested in making public comment, there will be time for that. And then at that point, we will unmute everyone. If you are interested in making public comment, if you would just state your name and your municipality, and we'll go through the policy at that point and begin your 3 minutes. Mrs. Baines-Clemens, if you are ready, you can unmute and begin the meeting if you'd like.
Okay, then we'll call the Finance Committee meeting to order according to policy. Should I still read that? Do we have anyone?
See if there is any public comment, and then if there is, we can read the policy.
Okay, is there any public comment? I don't see any public on. Oh wait, I do. Let me see.
I believe there are 2 members of the public on. I do not see either of them unmuting, so.
Right, okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right, then first on the agenda, we'll move to the State Audit Performance Review Resolution. Mr. Dahlberg.
Thank you. So the state audit was concluded a few months ago here in the district, and the auditors performed an audit exit conference with the administration and invited the school board members. I believe Mrs. Cullen was able to attend that as a representative for the school board. But basically, the last step that the district needs to do is pass a resolution that basically accepts the findings from the state auditors, and then lays out the district's plan to put in place to fix the audit findings and prevent them from happening in the future. So we had two findings in this 4-year audit cycle from the state. The first was a child accounting finding, which had to do with the miscoding of certain students that were non-resident students that were here in, I believe, in foster care, and our folks in child accounting just miscoded those folks, and which caused the district to miss some funding. But we went back from the 4 years of the audit and fixed those coding mistakes, and the district will be receiving the funding that we had missed for those kids. And we are also then going to have our child accounting folks train on a regular basis and have those folks attend conferences and so forth in order to keep up with child accounting changes and rules and things like that. So that was the first one. The second one was a failure to retain documentation to support supplemental transportation requests. So whenever the non-public schools request transportation for students that live in our district, we get documentation requesting that, and we keep that documentation. But what had happened was we had just a few months before they got here cleaned out an area of files, and we inadvertently threw those away. The folks that threw them away didn't realize that we needed them. We were keeping those documents in child accounting, and we've now changed our procedures, and we will keep those documents in the transportation office and keep them until the next state audit period comes around and those records are audited. So that was an audit finding that didn't lead to any financial penalty to us. So at this point, we just need to pass the resolution and send our documents into the state, and we'll be finished with the 4-year audit cycle. And then eventually, when the Department of Education gets around to it, they'll reimburse us for those dollars from the non-residents kids.
Thank you. Did anyone have any questions or comments on this? I don't see any. Dr. Bolton, did you want to weigh in at all?
Just wanted to clarify, Mr. Dalbert, the resolution language that's listed in the agenda, that is the standard resolution language that must be approved by the state for the audit.
Yes,
And that's the language that we'll put on the board agenda to be approved
yes,
at the meeting. Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
yes.
Okay. And next on the agenda is to review the contracts for approval, A through G. Mr. Dalbert?
Okay, the contracts this month, letter A is Learn Well, and that is educational services for a student that's placed in a medical facility. That's a recurring contract for students that are placed in these type of facilities. Learn Well is a vendor we use a great deal. B is the annual subscription for the IEP writer for our IEPs and our gifted IEPs. And that annual cost is listed there. C is our annual special education services agreement with the intermediate unit. So that's an estimate of the cost of the services that we are requesting at this time from the IU for next year for special education services. And that can change based on what we actually do use or do need. D includes 2 settlement agreements for the students identified as numbers 23 and 24. E is the contract for the change to the CVS Caremark prescription drug program for the settled Pesa agreement. And this will go into effect on May 1st. So this is the same documentation that was approved last month for the change in the PEA program. So the great news is that these all employees will be under the exact same language and benefit program for prescription drugs, which is was our goal going into negotiations. So we did a great job there. So and then F is the intermediate unit again, and this is for the early childhood classrooms at Diebler and Sellersville. And this is just a memo of agreement that we will provide those classroom spaces for next year. And then G is the annual legal services consultation agreement with Sweet Stevens. And the cost is $12,000, which is the same amount as we paid this year. And that is for the special education services.
Thank you. The only thing that I'd like us to try to look into a little bit, when you look at this agreement with Sweet Stevens is for the consultation services, and it's a flat fee for the year. But obviously, if we then need to do anything with any of these situations on top of that, that would be an hourly rate. And so I'd like to see what both of those contracts look like together and explore whether or not that's the best, sorry about the background noise, whether or not, you know, just kind of look into that, because we kind of just keep renewing this, and I think it's always a good idea to take a look at the details of these and see if they're still where they should be.
Definitely will do that. First of all, it's good to hear kids. So thank you for the background noise. We miss them. So yeah, so this contract does provide basic advice and consultation work, but if anything goes beyond that. So we'll get clarification in terms of what this 12,000 covers, in terms of what level of settlement, conversation, and advice, as well as then what kicks in beyond that. So I'll have Dr. Durr put something together and send it out to the board.
Thank you. And was there anyone else who had any questions or comments about any of these contracts? Okay, I don't see anyone. So then we'll move on to the general fund budget review. First is the program improvement and Office of Elementary and Secondary Education budget presentations with Dr. Scheid and Dr. Abarchak.
Mrs. Miller, if you could give Dr. Scheid the ability to share her screen, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Go ahead and try Dr. Scheid. I bet she's ready.
Yeah. Can you see? Yep. All right, I got this. So, good evening, everyone. Typically, over the past 6 years, and prior to that as well, I believe, if we were at this meeting, you would see the Office of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment K-12 budget. But because my role has changed and Dr. Robarchik's role, which was formerly Dr. Price's position, changed, you will see a differently structured budget. The monies are the same, it's just shared differently. Dr. Price did not have any role in curriculum instruction and assessment planning and budgeting, so it was all through me. So that's how this particular budget will be laid out, just a little differently than we have seen in the past. So we will go, as we typically would, we will talk about an overall budget. We'll go into program improvement budget. Then I will switch over to Dr. Robarchik, who will talk about the elementary budget. And then I will finish up with the secondary budget and our Henridge cyber budget. So as you can see, there's a comparison between the 1920 and then the 2021 budget in terms of program improvement. You'll see about a little over $9,000 decrease in program improvement, down about 3%. And then you'll see the assistant superintendent for elementary education. So it's really deceiving here in that regard. That $78,000 was Dr. Price's budget. So now it is a budget for the elementary assistant superintendent. So it did increase, and Dr. Robarchik is going to walk through those particular increases. And then you'll see how the assistant superintendent for secondary education, that budget has decreased, mainly because now I'm sharing that budget with Dr. Robarchik. So in terms of program improvement, which we typically have over the last 6 years that I've been here, and I know years prior, there was parameters set between $300,000 and $400,000 for program improvement. And we have significantly decreased that over these past years, and you'll see that. So program improvement for 2021 is at $272,666, and you'll see the total decrease. And there's always variance with that. There's always variance just depending on need. So program improvement really is about which particular programs do we really need to focus our planning and implementation and budgeting for. And as you recall, this year's program improvement was really centered around year 2 of elementary reading, English language, arts planning with making meaning. And Dr. Robarchik will talk a little bit more about that. So that moves us right into Dr. Robarchik, and he will talk a little bit about some of the changes that he has implemented this year.
So good evening,
Dr.
everybody. Yep.
Can you?
I can see it.
Can?
I can. So good evening, everyone. As you can see, there is a significant increase in the budget from last year to this year, but as Dr. Scheid explained already, that was Dr. Price, his budget that he had, and his budget was primarily centered around the new induction, professional development of non-instruction, as well as some of the other programs like Alice and those type of pieces that weren't as significant as it is once you get into the curriculum components of our budget. And so with you'll see between the two budgets is we took the main components of curriculum and shared them among the elementary and the secondary budgets. But from this one, you can see it. I did have an increase in the elementary of $46,712 with 37% increase. And down below will be the explanation of that variance in regards to the software licenses that we now have supporting the curriculum department. The 27,200 for Linkit, which we continue to utilize and do the breakdown of an analysis of our test data and understand how it impacts in performance and helps us to plan around instruction. And then Atlas, I have a little bit of Atlas in my budget. As we were splitting the budgets up, you'll see a little bit more in Dr. Scheid's, but I only needed to take 4,000 of that because we were able to take advantage of getting it earlier and starting it this year. So there will be a little bit of additional cost next year as we move into full access of Atlas. The class link, which is the accessing the programs through OneKey, and then the $1,000 for Respondus, which is the lockdown of the system, our internet system, which we split with Diane Miller. And then next year we are looking at implementing elementary Canvas at a very basic level. That's why the cost is so little. It's $1,500. But what it will allow us to do is Kara Gurish and Brooke Berge created some online professional learning that they were able to do through Canvas because of the type of portal that it can be, how it can be utilized. So we want to do the same for the elementary and offer same offerings for elementary teachers to take some of these online professional learning opportunities, and Canvas would be the platform that we would utilize for that to be to go through. And then EduLink is the big one that you will see. It is $15,262, and you're going to see that twice because it's on mine, in my budget, and it's also in Dr. Scheid's budget. This is basically the replacement of our Talent Ed teacher evaluation system. And the reason you're seeing such a higher cost of this for this year's budget is we did a 2-year contract. So we're paying 2 years in advance. We're paying this year and next year in advance in order to get a 5% discount on the overall license of PA ETEP, which is through EduLink. So really, when you look at it overall, we did increase the budget for our teacher evaluation system slightly by a couple $1,000s, but it offers us a great number of more tools to utilize and help teachers utilize that performance, the teacher evaluation performance tool to help them with their instruction in the classroom. And I can share more on the PA ETEP at a later time as well. But this EduLink, like I said, the nice part is that we are paying the 2 years. So next year, although we had an increase in our budget of just, I think it was over just about $29,000, we will actually have none of this in our budget next year because it was already paid for this year. And so we'll be starting in the black when we start our budget again next year, because we'll be going down by $30,000 because we won't have anything to budget for because it's paid for already. And then you just see the decrease of new teacher induction books of $400. This was something that we just found that was an over budgetary expense in the past, just because of how we run teacher induction, and Dr. Scheider are working collaboratively to just kind of revamp the induction program in itself, and we didn't feel this was necessary.
Ms. Clemens, I believe you have a question.
Could you just speak to a little bit about what the elementary Canvas is going to look like, what we're going to do next year, what the long-term plan is, and how that relates to all the Power School and Seesaw and all those different things that we're using, so we can kind of see how they. I think we have newer people too who aren't as familiar with those programs, but to kind of see how things kind of balance out between those programs.
Sure. With the elementary Canvas is a completely separate platform that we can interact with between professionals in regards to providing professional learning. At the secondary level, they use that to deliver, as we know, distance right now, the instruction to students. And it's very interactive. There are a lot of tools within it. This is I would say, a more sophisticated tool platform that is utilized, again, not only at the high school level, but at colleges and universities as well, for individuals to hold classes and professional learning opportunities. So truly, the only thing the elementary would be using it for is for teacher to teacher and colleague to colleague in regards to that professional learning opportunities. Whereas Seesaw is a platform that is used to deliver instruction to students, communicating with parents, communicating with students, delivering links that students can go on to. So really the difference in the two platforms is that the Canvas is more of a professional use within itself, and the Seesaw one is more of the teacher-student interaction and parent interaction. Does that make sense, Ms. Vance-Clemens?
Yes, thank you. So we're not going to be using, because you can do some of that through Canvas, though it will be more difficult with little kids. So you're just not using those features. It's more for the teachers. That's really helpful. Appreciate
Yes,
it.
correct. And then, as you can see, we do have our elementary traveling teachers mileage reimbursement of $1,500 as teachers move in from building to building for required tasks of interviews and professional development. Summer school supplies, which is very minimal, of $500. Our ESL camp of $3,700 to pay for salaries. And SurveyMonkey, which continues to be a tool we utilize to collect data when doing projects, so a $400 fee. Any questions about those variances that you'd like additional information on? Can I ask, Dr. Bolton, can I just ask Diane just to give us a brief, quick explanation of Respondus? Because it's really falls, we split it between the technology department, but she has more control of that platform.
I believe you just did. Mrs. Miller?
So yes, so Respondus is the lockdown browser that goes into effect when Canvas, if you're giving a quiz in Canvas. So in other words, it doesn't allow a student to go on to a Google or any other search engine. It just keeps them locked into where they are taking a quiz. Does that answer that, Tony?
Yes.
Are we ready to move on to secondary? Yes? Okay.
I didn't see anyone with questions. I didn't see anyone looking to ask questions, so I think you can move to the next thing.
Thank you, Mrs. Vance-Clemens. So a secondary superintendent's budget, you'll see a slight decrease of $9,500. And again, you'll see this decrease because it's a sharing of budget between the two levels. So in terms of Atlas, Dr. Barczyk just talked about that, and EduLink, as Dr. Barczyk just spoke to, we will not have that in either one of our budgets next year, but we split it between each budget for this year. Atlas, again, is the curriculum mapping program where all of our curriculum will be housed. We're really excited about that. So we will be embarking on writing our curriculum through that platform starting late spring. So, and then if you just look over at the decreases, it's really just splitting. It's still in my budget, but this is how much my budget was decreased by sharing these costs with the elementary level. And summer school supplies was just moved to a different budget. We do not need Linkit printing any longer. We really took a long, hard look at our budgets, and I was able to decrease book orders by $2,000. And the secondary staff professional travel budget, I was also able to decrease based on last year's estimate. Does anyone have any questions about this budget? And I'll move on to our cyber school. So it's always exciting for me to talk about this every year. As you can see, over the past 4 years, what we have been able to save the district. More importantly, or not more, or equally important, is what we're doing to help kids. So you'll see this year, over the 16-17 school year, we started out with serving 14 students We are currently serving, and that's as of March 31st, and it wouldn't go over that much anyway. 45 students, and the 45 students is this: 43 families this school year considered leaving Penridge School District to attend an outside cyber program. We were able to retain 43 of them, and we returned to students. We returned to students from PA Virtual Charter and PA Cyber. So that's the total of the 45 students. That is a combined savings to the district of $455,000. We're very excited about that. It takes a lot of work, and I know that you listened to me last week talk about that program and what's entailed and what's involved in that. So this is an explanation again of some of the things that Mrs. Garish does. And I will tell you, one of the things that have been really successful, and maybe it's not 20 students we're bringing back, but when we hold the family information nights, they have been successful. Over these past, 3 years where we've been holding those, at least one, if not more, of the families who are outside come back to the district. And even if they don't come back full-time, they'll come back in a blended capacity, whereby they would come to the actual high school for 2 classes, 3 classes, and stay home for taking the rest of those classes. So they've really been quite successful. And again, we have blended capable sections this year. That means that our teachers are teaching Penridge curriculum, and we have a number of slots saved so that our students in the cyber model, blended cyber model, will be able to actually partake in Penridge curriculum with a Penridge teacher, and that really is our goal. So does anyone have any questions about that?
So I just wanted to add a comment. I've heard from people who have really been communicating with all the with several districts throughout the county during this difficult time that we're experiencing, and you know, they were really impressed with how quickly Penridge was able to flip the switch when we were put in this situation and needed to go to cyber. And you know, obviously there's there's going to be some bumps in every situation, but the fact that there's already this base that's been established with our cyber program made it a lot easier for Penridge to be able to look at how to start to serve these kids in a virtual capacity. And that's obviously different from one family to the other as far as how easy or difficult that experience is right now. But I know that across the county it was much more of a struggle because a lot of them didn't already have this kind of a base to go on. And so I feel like this is benefiting us in more ways than one. And it's also great to see us bringing students back and educating them here, because as we've talked about numerous times, the programming that we're using is the same programming that's being used in these other cyber programs. It's just costing us a lot more money because of the way that the funding formula currently works at the state level. So hopefully eventually we'll solve that problem, but in the meantime, it is great to be able to bring some of those students back here and give them those same resources with the extra resources that we offer, with them being able to come in and get the extra supports face-to-face and be able to participate in things with other Penridge students, which is, you know, more beneficial than the opportunities they have there. So I just wanted to say thank you for everything that you guys have been doing on this front.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Banis Clemens, because you've been on board since the very beginning when we presented this. And I'll tell you, I'm sure that you would agree with me, none of us could have imagined that we would have to use it for this. But yes, we are so fortunate to be in a position where we were ready to move forward quickly. So thank you. And thank you to all the board members for that support. So the next section here is really just showing you what these budget numbers are, but this is the same information. There's nothing different in here. We just broke it down by series. These are the same ones we just talked about, just by account codes. The only thing I guess that wasn't in there was the Act 93 membership that we have and the staff development fees. Yeah, so pretty much that's what we have in the budget. And that is the total budget. And again, as Dr. Avarchik said, we automatically know, all things being equal, and we know it won't be totally equal because program improvement budgets fluctuate year to year, but there will be a $30,000 decrease in our budget, 15 and 15 overall for next year. Does anybody have any questions?
I don't see any.
Can I,
Okay.
can I just share one more thing? With the program improvement money that we did, I don't know if I did mention this when we were talking about elementary, but as you know, the program improvement money that for next year that's budgeted is for the literacy program at the elementary level, and will be the materials for the Making Meaning program and the remainder of the teachers who will be in need of Words Their Way.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Scheid.
Thank you.
And the next thing we're going to do is the general fund with Mr. Dahlberg. But I just wanted to kind of share. I've had conversations in the last couple of weeks with the administration, and I've also had conversations with many of you on the board who have reached out regarding the fact that we have a community right now that's dealing with some of them losing their jobs, not getting the income that they're used to getting, and the difficult situation that all of them are in. And I know that the board and the administration have been sympathetic to that and trying to find ways that we can help the community, provide support. And one of those things is going to come down to the budget. And obviously, you know, when people are in this difficult financial situation across the board, we're looking at what are the ways that we can try to make things easier for people and how can we provide as much flexibility as possible. And so in those conversations, we've talked about, you know, what are some things that maybe don't necessarily that have to be done this year? What can be done with the budget? Is there a way to provide more cost savings? I know that we talked about at the last finance committee meeting that we would not raise taxes. There would not be a tax increase this year. We talked about if there ends up being a little bit of a difference, we have extra money in the capital fund that we could pool some money because we have more money in there than what we need to be able to cover that. And so that's one option. We talked about the flexibility of dates with, you know, when taxes are due. We have those 3 tax periods. We have the payments that get made throughout the year, and to look at what kind of flexibility as far as when those payments are due. And I know that the administration has put a lot of time into looking at the budget and dissecting it and seeing, you know, what kinds of things need to be done and what things don't necessarily need to be done. And that's going to be part of what Mr. Dahlberg's going to speak to tonight. You know, but we've definitely been talking about how to provide some kind of relief and looking at, we don't know yet. Some of this stuff is kind of up in the air, but what kind of savings will we see? Will we get certain reimbursements from the state for some of the expenses that we're paying during this time? A lot of that is kind of up in the air. And so we'd love to be able to pass on any of those cost savings that come to us, to be able to provide those cost savings to the community at this time. But some of that's a little up in the air. So hopefully we'll get some more clarification and be able to get more specific in some of those things. But Mr. Dahlberg can speak to where we're at so far. So Mr. Dahlberg, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Miller, if you could give Mr. Dahlberg the permission to share his screen, please. Thank you. Go ahead, try it, Mr. Dahlberg. I think you're good.
Okay, great. All righty. So this presentation on April 14th, as Mrs. Banis Clemens said, we are in a completely different world, to sort of speak, than we were on March 9th when we gave our last budget presentation. Our assumptions for both revenues and expenditures are have changed. Many things that we knew for pretty much a fact about local revenues and state revenues are now up in the air, according to, because of the current situation that we're in. So we took a long, hard look at expenditures over the last few weeks, and that was our biggest focus, was trying to find things that we could reduce in the expenditure side, because the revenue side is just really unknown. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know what the impact will be on our local revenues. We don't know what the impact will be on our state revenues and our federal revenues. So we're really, and it's not just Penridge, it's all 500 school districts in the state are really trying to find their way right now in regards to expenditures and revenues for their 2021 budget. So the goals of this presentation are to take a look at the current economic situation because of COVID-19. Also, then I want to review the district capital projects fund with you, review our debt service with you, provide a status of where we're at on 2021 after the changes that we're going to recommend to make, and then look at our path moving forward over the next couple of months, because we will indeed have to pass the first budget in May and then have a final budget passage in June. So those requirements will not go away, even if the path forward is not clear. So since our last meeting in March, of course, we stopped, having our facilities open and so forth. And then the state passed Act 13 shortly after everything kind of broke. And what Act 13 requires a number of things, but one thing that it did require was that all school districts continue to pay all of its employees their full salary and benefits, as if nothing, as if the COVID-19 pandemic had not broken out. So all employees continue to be paid 100% of their salaries and benefits, and that entails about 71% of our budget. The administration is actively trying to find things for these folks to do away from the district, because we can only bring essential employees into the district, and we're doing that for things like feeding kids lunches, for any particular maintenance that needs to be done on an essential basis. We had, during the first week, all of our cleaning people in the district and actively cleaning all the buildings to make sure that they were cleaned very well. But since then, we are having people in the district on an as-needed basis. So in our normal yearly process, we would stop spending as much as possible at the end of February. We expect that anything that is going to be needed for the rest of the fiscal year would be bought by the end of February. So all goods, materials, supplies for the educational process should have already been purchased this year, and probably are purchased this year, with the exception of certain things that we know have to happen at the end of the year, like graduation and end of year awards and activities that principals have for their particular schools. But for the most part, all educational expenses should be pretty much finished up in February and taken care of. We have spent approximately $17,000 on additional cleaning supplies since the COVID-19 pandemic broke out here, and additional technology supplies so that we can provide the kids with the technology they need at home. We will expect to lose approximately $250,000 in the nutritional services program this year. As you know, normally that program breaks even or better. Most years they do better. But this year, again, we have to continue to pay all the salaries and benefits for all those employees as if nothing had happened. And we have, a great reduction in our income because we're basically, our schools aren't open. We're not feeding kids other than the kids that come for the meals that we're giving out. And we will get some federal and state reimbursement on those meals. But Gina has reworked her budget and her estimate based on the cost of food and the reimbursement that cost of the food, where we were up till the middle of March, plus the cost of the food that we're using to feed kids now, and the small amount of income that we get for those meals. She expects we will lose about $250,000 in the fund. So that may be a consideration that we need to make from the general fund as we get closer to the end of the year and we see actual numbers or better estimates that the general fund may indeed this year for the first time make a contribution to the nutritional services fund in order to keep them from having such a large deficit. Diesel fuel and gasoline contracts, the contracts that we have, we commit to a certain number of gallons each year, and in the current year we committed to the amount of fuel that we use on average each year, and believe me, our folks Carl and Jessica have that down. They know how much gas we're going to use in a year. It's pretty amazing how close they get on their estimates. So we have approximately $115,000 in diesel fuel and $32,000 in gas that we are required under contract to purchase. So we're looking at the best way for us to do that. We have a couple of options, and we will determine what's best, the best way to move forward. We will have some savings from substitutes. Approximately 12 weeks at the end of the school year here will save us about $325,000 in substitute costs, and some electricity savings, about 3 months worth, estimated about $65,000. Most of our other utilities like natural gas, oil, we were pretty much through the winter, so pretty much through the heating season. Not a lot of savings left to squeak out of those avenues throughout the rest of the year as we're moving into the spring months and the shoulder months where we don't use a lot of utilities. So that's kind of a look at some of those major expenditure areas. On the revenue side, there will be an impact on earned income tax revenue, based on unemployment, and the moving of the required filing date to July 15th. In our April collections, we normally see a very good month because of the tax due date. That's been moved back to July 15th. So our earned income tax collections will take a hit. We don't know how much yet. Those collections, are on a couple of month lag, so it's going to take a little while for us to know what exactly we're looking at with earned income tax. Hopefully, you know, the sooner this ends and people go back to work, the better it is for everyone, and the better it is for the district. Not only the kids, but you know, for our revenue sources. Impact on real estate transfer tax revenues. If people aren't working, less real estate is sold, it'll have an impact. Impact on interest earnings, the rates have reduced drastically. So we will see some reductions there throughout the rest of this year. Impact on rental revenue. All the buildings are closed, so we're not having any outside access or utilization of the buildings. The state has guaranteed to hold our 1920 revenue levels. That is also in Act 13. So as Act 13 said, that the districts were required to pay all employees salaries and benefits, and it also requires the state to pay the districts what they were expecting to receive in revenue. Now, that is an interesting scenario because the state right now is about $4 billion short. They're estimating to be about $4 billion short in their $34 billion budget. So where that revenue is going to come from in order to pay these things, I don't know if the state will do borrowing or what the state will do, but we will be impacted surely at a state level in 2021. So some things to think about as we look at budgets for 2021 and beyond. Prior to March 13th, which was when basically we all shut down and we changed doing things the way we normally do them, and then our assumptions following. The Act 1 base index, which allows for revenue increases in school districts, it was scheduled to increase from 2.6 to 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, and 3.5. A big part of that is the statewide weekly wage, and if the unemployment goes high, skyrockets in the state, it's going to have a negative impact on this calculation. So we will most likely see those rates in the future change from 3.2s probably down into the 1%, 1.5% range. Based on the history of the last recession from 2008, 2010, the Act 1 rates were in that 1.5%, 1.7% rate for a number of years. So that surely we'll see that change. So we had an idea of what our basic education subsidy, special education subsidy would be. At this point, the budget at the state level it's no longer for sure for next year. What the governor asked for probably is not going to happen as far as increases. There will very well could be decreases in state aid to school districts next year. There is money in the Federal CARES Act for school districts. PASBO, which is the professional organization I'm a part of, our leadership believes that the state will take those federal dollars and use those potentially to plug their holes for educational funding to try to keep districts as close to level funded as possible, but certainly perhaps no new revenues for school districts for next year, or perhaps more longer into the future, and it all depends on how long this lasts. So nothing with the federal money is set in stone yet, but we are thinking that the state may take those dollars and plug them into their budget and kind of supplant them. So historically, our earned income tax projections, we've shown solid growth over the years. on those. We don't know what the impact will be for Penridge based on unemployment and so forth. That information will come as we move down the road here. PSERS rates, we expected them to go up in very small increments over the next 4 years, very manageable. Still increases, but much more manageable than we've seen, 4, 5, 6 years ago. And the PSERS rate is dependent on the stock market, and the stock market has crashed. So PSERS rates could dramatically increase in the future. Now, 2021 is set in stone. It's been certified, it will not change, but starting in 21, 22, we could see some drastic increases in PSERS rate if the market does not recover substantially. So,
Mr. Dahlberg, is that a formula that they use, or is it just at their decision as to what the appropriate rate is?
So I'm sure there's some type of wild mathematical equations that go into it, Dr. Bolton, but it's really, I think, is more about what type of returns they're getting from the stock market in order to pay down that big deficit. The PSERS had billions of dollars of deficit. So the vast majority of the annual rate goes to pay down that deficit. So it's very, very dependent on the stock market. So stock market goes down, that rate's going to react higher.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Some other things, real estate tax collection rates. We're very fortunate here. We collect better than 97% of our real estate taxes without going to delinquency. And the vast majority of that is paid in the discount rate. This also may be impacted by unemployment, attrition, meaning employees on an annual basis who retire. That could be impacted because many times individuals are maybe afraid to retire or so forth, and we really count on that a great deal each year to help balance the budget. Tax appeals, they're likely to go up in a poor economy. Those professionals out there that do that for a living are gearing up to do tax appeals based on the economy. We hear that from our professional organization. Our ability to raise taxes may be limited based on a recession, a poor economy, and also the changes in the Act 1 index. Our investment yields will be impacted. Special education costs could be impacted negatively based on challenges to FAPE and so forth. And employee leaves under FMLA. That has been expanded. FMLA leave, a lot of time has been expanded under the federal law, the new federal law. And that expansion extends into the 21-22 fiscal year. So many things are impacting the budget, could impact the budget, and are really unknown at this time. So that's kind of a summary of what we've been thinking about, considering, and so forth as we move forward. So so as Mrs. Banis Clemens says, a lot happened, a lot did happen, and there's a lot of things for us to have to look at and consider. So the next slide I have is to give you an idea of capital projects funding before we jump back into the general fund budget. So our capital projects fund from our last audited statement, our financial statements at June 30, 19 was about $21.5 million. We had summer projects during the summer of 2019 that were paid for this fiscal year, just over $4 million. Our estimated summer projects for 2020, we have our ESCO that we passed, about $2.5 million. And we have the addendum that we'll talk about a little bit later tonight that is just under $600,000. And then we also have our professional services with Reynolds to do the studies and the planning that they're working on for us, and that's just over $600,000. We also have a renovation at the tech school that our share right now is estimated at about $376,000, and we have our technology projects for this summer, which are an estimate of about $430,000. And then I have an estimate from, I've added up all the estimates that Reynolds shared with us from all of the different projects that we've been talking about with them. Now, this doesn't mean that all these projects will be done, but these are the projects that we have, as a group, have looked at with them during our facilities meetings. And the board will pick and choose which projects they choose to do. But all the projects listed there add up to about $10.5 million. The long-term facilities and maintenance plan, that planner is still being developed, and that will start with our projects in the summer of 2021. So we take all those expenditures away or out of the balance, we would be left with about $2.3 million. So there's a lot of balls, moving balls, and decisions for the board to make about which projects they would like to do, which ones they would not like to do, and so forth. And as you know, we've been able in the last number of years to put $3, $4, $5 million a year into the capital projects fund. Our ability to do that in the next couple of years may be severely limited based on what's happening and how long the impact of what's happening will last. So this just gives us an idea of where we're at based on what we've been talking about as a group. So the next slide is the debt service slide.
Mr. Dahlberg, can you
Yep.
just, do you know if we're looking to apply for those grants for some of these traffic changes? I'm curious, do you think those grants would be, do you think that there would be any change to what they offer for grants due to the situation? Does that tend to have any impact on that? Or do you think that that's something that is kind of its own thing? I just wasn't sure if that's something that would be impacted by this financial crisis at the state level, or if you think that grant money would still be kind of kept intact.
Honestly, I don't know that. That may be a question that Mr. Cormack might be able to answer better than I, since he
Yes.
works in that professional realm a lot more than I do with those type of projects. So I don't know. You're muted, Bob.
No, he's not. It's just soft, Mr. Cormack.
Oh, I'm sorry. Should I talk louder? Okay, I'll talk better. The Criminal Finance Authority, that's the venue with the consultants looking to bring funds through. They put $41 million of their budget into DCED for a loan program. I don't know how much extra funds they have available at this point in time. That's really going to depend on whether or not the governor's office and the state legislature provide them any additional monies. So I think to look at a grant coming out of the CFA is going to be extremely difficult next year.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. The next slide is the debt service slide that I show you each year. So we have about four years remaining at the high level of debt, just around $13 million a year. The blue is the principal portion, the orange is the interest portion. When we get to fiscal year 24-25 is when the debt decreases to about $6 million, and then fiscal year 25-6 is when it drops to about $4 million for 4 years. And then the remaining years are the district share of the Upper Bucks Technical School debt. So the next slide is just the Act 1 index allowable additional millage at the 2.6%. Just a carryover slide from the last budget meeting. The revenue changes since March 9th, we have not made any at this point, just because there are so many unknowns. So like I said, we really focused this last few weeks on the expenditure side, hoping that we will get more information on the revenue side. So on the expenditure side, what we've done is we went through the budget, and we've really anywhere where we found any or any type of extra money, anything that wasn't absolutely necessity, we reduced or cut back on. We tried to, we did not go into any of the schools' budgets to reduce anything from the from the classroom, with the exception of one area in the high school where the principal said that there was some extra money in the one program that he was willing to reduce for the year. So we did that, and that was about $10,000. So from our professional services, we reduced $139,000, purchase property of $115,000, other purchase services $31,000, supplies $182,000, equipment $300,000, and this $300,000 in equipment is the buses. Our bus and van line item has been $850,000 for a number of years. Really since I arrived here in the district 5 years ago, we implemented that, and under the current conditions and the fact that we have made such great advances in our fleet, and then under the current economic conditions, we're going to reduce that down by $300,000. And then in the fees area, we reduced $137,000. So we reduced $904,000 out of the budget on the expenditure side since our last meeting. What that does is it takes our.
Can you go back to screen, please, for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Back to that one. I just want to emphasize and thank a couple of things that Mr. Daubert said, because this is not extra things that were in there. There really were lots of hard discussions with budget leaders in terms of how we prioritize some of the things we were doing around professional development and use of title funds to be able to move some of our items from the general fund into some of those title accounts. We postponed some purchases. He talked a little about the buses and making some determinations that it wouldn't hurt the classroom if we waited a year to postpone some of those purchases to save some money. And then there were some things that we chose to do without, but under all circumstances, we made sure we protected the classroom. Right. And so none of these changes, we do think that from our community standpoint, it makes sense to examine our expenses and revenues, because we just don't know what the revenues will be. And so to be able to do what we can for expenses, so to be able to find $900,000 out of a budget that did not have fluff in it is just a tribute to all of the people who were budget leaders that Mr. Daubert went back to and said, we have to do something. So I just really want to thank Mr. Daubert for leading in that, as he's done that research in terms of what it could look like for next year. And so before he moves into what the impact then is from a budget standpoint, obviously, there's a positive impact. I just wanted to thank him for that and just emphasize that this is not classroom expenses. This will not impact our instruction. You'll notice we didn't change anything around the elementary literacy. We didn't change anything around positions and things that are going to improve teachers' experiences as well as students in the classroom. So thank you, Mr. Dolan.
Thank you, Dr. Bull. Okay, so our summary last month on March 9th was a budget deficit of $993,000 with the $904,000 that we reduced on the expenditure side. We are down to a deficit of $88,000 at this point. And then the summary of revenues. These are the same numbers that you saw last month. And then our expected, or our summary of object summary. You can see where we're at on March 9th, and then the changes are implemented, and where we're at now at April 14th. Our expenditure total is down from 144.7 million to 143.8 million dollars. So, and then we have the graph, and again, our budget drivers for the year. Our contracts about 2 million for wages. Our retirement about 1.3 million. Tech school is up about $500,000. IU services, 474,000. The new positions that are still in the budget, and Social Security increase. Total expenditure increase about 4.9 million. Revenue increase about 2.2 million. Medical and prescription change about 1.5 million. And the expenditure cuts are now up to 1.1 million for about a $4.8 million, which puts us at an actual number of just over $88,000, or just under $89,000. So, and then the next slide is again the list of positions that Dr. Bolton and Dr. Scheid and Dr. Durr have spent a good bit of time going over with you. The next slide is the budget timeline from here, from April 14th through June. We will, of course, have our next finance meeting on May 5th, so we will look at any changes that may come between now and then. We will have to have our first vote on the budget in May. We are able to make any changes after that we wish to, so we'll have another budget meeting on June 8th, and then the final meeting for adoption is June 15th. I will say there has been a number of discussions at the state level about school districts and budgets. There have been some folks in Harrisburg discussing eliminating school districts' ability to raise taxes next year. There have been some discussions about expanding the discount period. There have been discussions about changes to the penalty period. All kinds of different things are being talked about in Harrisburg at this point. And unfortunately, the real discussion that we would like to see happen, the charter school reform discussion, has unfortunately been pushed to the side because of everything that is now, a very critical issue in Harrisburg regarding funding and so forth. So it's really it's an unfortunate situation, because there are many of us who were really hopeful that we would get somewhere this year in Harrisburg with that. So kudos to Dr. Scheid for continuing to work on that program so diligently.
Thank you, Mr. Dalbert. Does anyone have any questions or comments regarding that?
Mrs. Cullen?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Dr. Bolton already said, that I really do appreciate the effort that was made, and that was quite an effort to reduce the expenses by almost $1 million. And I know that people will appreciate that, and I'll make sure that I'll let everyone know that these are not things that are going to impact the instruction, that it's not going to affect our children's education, but the effort's not lost on me. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
I just had two more thank yous to say because they're both boxes here. We need to thank Mr. Harper. His leadership and direction as we've had to make some quick changes to our buildings and make some decisions about staffing and the needs in the buildings and the care, the deep cleaning that they did the first week that we were closed, and the men and women who rallied around the buildings from that standpoint, as well as their continuing monitoring of the buildings, as well as the supplies, different supplies that we needed, as well as some of the current supplies that are going. So I just wanted to thank Mr. Harper while he was visually on the screen for all of his work, as well as Mrs. Miller, who's a black box on our screen, but also continue to just service our staff, our families, our students. They've given out hundreds of devices. They're here at the high school on a regular basis, handing that out to families who have needs or as technical problems happen. They've been doing so many things remotely and being able to help students from home, just be able to interact with the software problems, even take over their screens if they need to be able to fix something and those pieces. So I want to thank both of them publicly. There's just an awful lot of moving parts, and they've done a wonderful job during this first month of our closure. So thank you to both of you. Mr. Kraus?
You have to unmute. There you go.
There you go. We'll get there. So thank you all for the hard work. The budget reductions are amazing, and a lot of hard work went into that. So thank you to everybody. Mr. Dalbert, you and your team did an outstanding job in helping to bring those reductions forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Harper, thank you so much for what you're doing to keep our schools clean and keep everything moving. I really appreciate it. And I know that there's a lot going on there, and I'm only scratching the surface of what you're really doing. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Mrs. McHale, the rest of the administration, Dr. Shai and Diane, everybody, thank you so much. This wouldn't be possible without all of you. Mr. Dalbert, I do have two questions on the budget, if you'll indulge me for a moment. So the April 15th date for the secretary to certify the tax relief, you think that's feasible?
Yes, for this year, I just actually had a budget webinar today with PASBO that Ms. Light, Amy Light, and I sat in on. And one of the things that they talked about was they believe that the funding will be there for this year for us to apply to the homestead farmstead reduction, which is what you're asking about. The next fiscal year is very much a question mark. Okay. But they believe there's dollars there for this year, but we will have to get to, we should actually see something tomorrow.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Yeah. Second question, on the fuel contract, is there a force majeure clause in there for these type of circumstances?
Well, there's not. We commit to a certain number of gallons, and if we don't use them, we have a few options. We can sell the gallons back at the end of the year, which if the market is like it is now, we would lose because where the market was when we purchased it is higher than where the market is now. So we don't necessarily want to do that. We can purchase the gallons and try to store them. Carl is looking into options for that, if there's other places that we could store. But then we would have fees for storage. So we're not sure that's the best route either, but we're looking into it. We can push the gallons into the next year, but we have to pay a penalty whenever we use them. So we are determining what that penalty is compared to what the loss would be if we just sold it now versus if we could store it somewhere. So we're looking at those options. But to answer your question, no, we committed to a certain number of gallons and we were required to either buy them, sell them back, or utilize them.
Okay, and is this an independent contract, energy contract, or is this something we did through CoStars or something?
This is through our IU. All the districts in the county have a work as a group to purchase fuel on the at the best prices possible. And to be honest with you, the good news is the market has dropped so much that we've actually been able to purchase fuel for next year and 21-22 at lower cost than considerably lower cost than what we're paying now. So for next year's budget and 21-22 in the budget, we've actually captured some of the savings, and that's helped us be able to reduce the budget deficit.
Okay.
So there's bad news with it, and there's some good news with it.
We'll be selling fuel out of our own tank.
Well, I'll try anything once.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments from anyone? Okay, I don't see any. Okay, so the next thing we will move on to is the presentation on the contract amendment for SiteLogic Reynolds Giza.
Okay. So I just dragged the SiteLogic presentation down. Did it show up? Oh, that is awesome.
Yes.
That's so cool. All right. Okay, so what we did was we asked SiteLogic, Garrett, to send us the presentation this month to make it simpler for everyone. And what he has done is he has sent us the amendment, the cost for the amendment based on the bids that they received for the projects that we had added. So we have the freezer replacement at Grass, came in about $90,000. The domestic booster package and sewer lift station at Grass, about $164,000 for $254,000 at Grass. Diebler has the dishwasher, about $114,000, and Penn South has the dishwasher at about $117,000. And then Sellersville, remember we had the floor there that we needed to take care of because it was starting to have show some problems. About $105,000 for that project, for the total of the amendment of $590,921, which is lower than their estimates, about $25,000. So this will take care of all of those summer projects for 2020. And I have these totals included in this in the total capital projects estimate I showed you a little bit ago. So, okay. And then the next part, again, this is just a review of what Reynolds went over with the board last month in March. And again, this just needs to go to the voting meeting for approval. Since it was, like I said, we went through this at the March meeting, and then we got our March meeting, voting meeting canceled. So this is the design and design fee estimates for the projects at the high school, Sellersville, West Rock Hill, and then the bottom right-hand quarter is the total, $614,800. And again, if you recall from our discussion, any of these projects can stop at any time based on if the district decides not to do it, or if something comes back that we wouldn't get approval, or something changes that, that the estimate may drastically change or so forth. This is we pay as we go through the design process. And if we stop a project, we stop paying for the design at that point in time. So those were I think the important parts that I recall from Garrett's conversation with us.
One thing on this screen, Mr. Dalbert, we've had some conversation with Mrs. Baker at Sellersville as we were discussing the project, the traffic flow project there. She has looked at her numbers for this year and really feels as though perhaps that project may not be necessary at Sellersville. The addition of kindergarten busing has eliminated the stacking issue that happens at the end of the day. From a bus standpoint and a parent standpoint, and there is not that safety overlap in the backing up onto the road that she's seen before, because that was primarily kindergarten parents. So I'm going to have one final conversation with her, but there is a chance that when you get this proposal at the April board meeting, that the Sellersville number virtually. But when I've had a couple conversations with her, and I know Dr. Robarczyk has as well, she feels as though perhaps that is not necessary, and that it is a safe situation, and that it was a year ago when we were talking about this and those positions from that standpoint. We have at this point instructed SiteLogic Reynolds to just pause at Sellersville until we give them further information. They have been out doing what they can. They obviously are not doing traffic studies at this point, and traffic is not normal at any of these sites, and they obviously will resume that when they can. But we have seen some land surveying work. Saw two men here at the high school today, and they were masked and appropriately distant from each other as that work has been happening to be able to move forward for these projects. So I will, after I talk to Mrs. Baker again, give you a final update on the Sellersville piece. We wanted to keep the prices here in front of you because there is a possibility. But I do think that there is also a possibility that $112,500 will be removed from the project come April.
Thank you. The only, just if we back up to what's being done this summer, since it's been decided that school will be out for the remainder of this year, it may be helpful, I don't know, because some of this stuff like dishwasher replacement is a quick thing, but like, for example, the Sellersville asbestos floor abatement, I don't know if contacting if providing some flexibility to the start date would be helpful so that they could even get in there and get started while the buildings can't be used anyway. I know that there have been exceptions made for these projects to continue at the state level, and it's something that we're talking about at the tech school right now, because the projects that we had scheduled, the renovation project that was supposed to be happening over the summer, we may even be able to start that sooner, which is a huge benefit to us because there was a possibility that project would overlap the start of the following school year. And by pulling that back, we can have that project completed before the start of the next school year. I don't think we were in that position, but it certainly is in the way when people are trying to do things. And so if it's helpful to move things up it may be worth having the conversation. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there for the flexibility. And then obviously the administration can look at whether or not any of that makes sense.
Yeah, will make sense. I'll have Mr. Harper and Mr. Dalbert follow up with SiteLogic to see whether that's helpful. Then we'd have to follow up with the state to see what's possible. They have been granting waivers with the outside work. Inside work, they've given some yeses and some nos. So I think we'd have to look at that. But we'll follow up and see whether that would be helpful or not. Thank you. It's a good idea.
Were there any other questions or comments on this? Okay, I don't see any. So the last thing that we'll move on to is the auditing firm RFP results.
Excuse me. Okay. So we did an RFP for auditing beginning with the end of this fiscal year and for 4 years. And we got these results back, I believe it was in February. Again, our happenings in March kind of delayed us from bringing this forward. So we are bringing it here in April, and to share with you the information from the RFP and the results that we received. We also shared with you a spreadsheet that kind of summarized all the different areas and questions and responses, and that hopefully that spreadsheet was helpful if you got a chance to look through that, to compare the firms and the responses that we received. But from our RFP, this is a list of the expectations that we looked for from the companies when we put out the RFP. We're looking for a financial and internal control audit for each fiscal year. We need general purpose financial statements. Since we have federal programs, we also need a single audit each year to audit our federal programs. And that includes our nutritional services program, since we receive federal funding in that program. We need to be able to retain the audit work papers for a minimum of 7 years, and for us to have access to them. And very importantly, we looked at the timeline for our audit work, when we expect it to be completed, when we expect a report to be given to the school board. And we're very much concerned about meeting those requirements, that time frame in late fall, end of October, November, where we are required to submit our annual financial report to the state. So we need to have our audit done. We need to have our financial statements so that we can file those fiscal reports with the state on a timely basis. So those are the things that are expectations in the process. And this is a list of the considerations that we looked at when we were looking at the proposals. We were looking, the technical experience of the audit firm, how many audits they do with Pennsylvania school districts, especially in the last couple of years, what the qualifications are of the audit staff that will be working with us, what their knowledge is of Pennsylvania laws and Pennsylvania school districts, the size and the structure of the firm, and lastly, the costs that were quoted for the audit services. This is the information that we requested in the proposals. We wanted a title page, a table of contents, letter of transmittal, and then importantly is to look at the profile of the audit firm and the size of the audit firm, what their experience is. We wanted a list of the school districts in the state that they work with, and that will certainly, we were looking for, school districts of a like size, budget, not only a budget size, but, geographic size and so forth, so that, they're not completely, so they have an understanding of what they're walking into, or at least some experience with district our size. And then there are other things that we were looking at, what the firm's approach is in their auditing, type of program they use and so forth, computer statistics, those type of things, and the summary of experience of the auditors. So at this point, I think Mr. Gearhart, would you like to make comment on, I know you, Mr. Gearhart and Mrs. Banis Clemens helped Dr. Bolton and I go through these. responses that we got. We received responses from 4 firms, and they were a big help to us going through them and helping us make an educated decision. So I know that Mr. Gearhart wanted to talk a little bit about that process. So.
Yeah, so did take a look at, obviously the four companies in this on this slide here that came back with the proposal, and I know Mr. Daubert talked, and the previous slide, or one of the previous slides, talked about one of the the considerations, and obviously the cost of the auditing services would play a pretty big factor in here, and kind of talking with Megan, and when we reviewed through this, we really kind of looked at two of them stood out as they were the most expensive, kind of by far, and then there was another 2 that were pretty comparable. One a little more expensive than the other, but looking through the what each firm sent back, just from my review and my kind of, I guess, background history, I am an auditor outside of this for an insurance company. There were a few things that kind of stuck out for me into which auditing firm that I preferred based off of anything. I know if you go to the next slide,
sure,
you'll see kind of what I was talking about. BBD and Malley are obviously the 2 highest there, and then Barbicane and Axelrod, somewhat, obviously less, somewhat close. It's still, Axelrod's $6,000 more for the 4 years. But I think looking between those 2, those 2 companies specifically, I guess I was definitely leaning and like the Axelrod company for various reasons. If you look at theirs, when looking at the summary that Mr. Daubert put together, one of the main things for them is the total number of hours that they're going to spend on site here, or dedicated to us, was 270 hours. That's more than Malley, who the district has been dealing with over the last quite a few number of years, a significant increase. I think Malley came back with 186 total hours committed to the audit process, whereas, like I said, with Axelrod, they're at 270. Barbicane didn't necessarily give a distinct number of hours. They kind of just went through the the partner be on site for a minimum of 10%, and then said that we would have obviously the other their senior auditor, senior accountant, and other partners or other members being there to actually conduct the the audit work. So that was something that I thought was important. A lot of things can come up through, I guess if you're, more of what I'm trying to say is, the more time you have to spend, the more thorough job, obviously, and kind of like, in my experience, a lot of things that I come across just come up as, through conversation, talking, and, to be able to spend, I wouldn't want to limit any of that. And that was something that stood out to me. Another thing, I took a look at, they all use, and I talked with Megan and, about this, they all use, the statistical sampling, the type of technology they use. They all use systems and technology that I may not necessarily have experience with in what I do, but I've heard of all of them and heard good things about them. The one thing that stood out for me for Axelrod, another thing, was the type of audit program used. Now, they all talk about tailoring the approach towards our needs. but Axelrod kind of focused more so on risk-based approach, which, tailoring the approach to the district's needs kind of hints at that, but there are also risk-based audit methods and things like that that can kind of take that a little bit further and really get into what things are the high risk for for the school districts and for our district, and take a risk-based approach to testing and things like that. So that was another one that stood out for me. And the only other thing that I wanted to comment on, I mean, they all obviously had similar, not similar, but they all had work with school districts and focus in that area. Barbicane, they indicated that they only do government and school audits, which, obviously we need that type of experience. And Axelrod, they indicate that they specialize in the public sector. I think, I guess it's just me, maybe I don't ever like to be limited to just one area. There might be some things that you can pick up or that a firm would understand or pick up, doing an audit of something, outside of that. So while obviously we have a need for specialization in, school districts and auditing that, that was just something that, kind of, I don't know, not necessarily questioned, but, just kind of struck me as, well, maybe we don't, just limiting yourself to that would be something that I don't particularly care for. But that's all I really, all I really had. I don't know, Megan, if you have anything else that, that you wanted to talk about.
Thanks, Ryan. No, it was interesting because when we all kind of evaluated things individually and then talked about what we thought afterwards, and we came to the same conclusion, but both had very different thoughts.
Yeah.
And just a couple of things to kind of add when looking at the proposals. One of the proposals suggested that one of the people who would be a main contributor of the RFP, of the audit, was someone who did not list a certification in Pennsylvania. And so that concerned me. I did ask Ryan about that because I don't know how, to see how big of a deal that was. And we kind of both thought that was pretty significant. And then that presentation for Axelrod also spoke more to the need of Penridge. I think that they had a better sense of what our needs were than the other, and then of course the cost piece. But I think you covered pretty well what kind of went into that discussion. So are there any other Mr. Dalbert, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Just the last slide, that the group of the four of us, our recommendation is the Axelrod. Even though it is a little bit more money over the 4 years, the service and the company seems to be the best fit for us. So.
And I really appreciate the fact that we have an auditor on the board. That was good to be able to get some free advice from that standpoint, even if he has been banished to the garage, apparently.
The basement, yeah.
Oh, the basement. I saw the bike helmet. I thought you were in the garage.
The kids wanted to get on FaceTime with, I don't know, Nanny and do a game or something. I don't know. I was moving down here for that.
But I really appreciate Mr. Gerhardt's expertise and Ms. Baines-Clemens looking through that with us.
Oh, no
To
problem.
help us make that
I do too. I appreciate your
You're welcome. Yeah.
Megan, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Have you contacted any of the school districts on either one of those firms as to how they performed?
Yes.
Mr. Dalbert did, so I'll let him just speak to that.
Yes, I did. I called a number of districts on each of the two firms that we were very heavily considering, and I got positive reviews from every school district that I contacted. So,
Was that for both firms or just one or the other?
Both firms.
Interesting. Okay.
Yep, both firms they're very good references. So, and I didn't call the ones that they listed as reference. So I dug down into all the school districts that I could find that they were working with. So.
Yeah, I take a different opinion than Mr. Cameron and that I like to see a firm that is specifically detailed doing schoolwork, not a firm that's just a shotgun approach where they're going to incorporate all different types of nonprofits. So I lean towards the firm that just specifically deals with school audits. To me, that is a criteria that's hard to find. And in today's environment, I think they bring more experience to the picture than anybody else. But that's, again, just my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying on that. I will say, they don't necessarily just do school audits. They do school and government audits. There's a lot of other, government, a lot of government issues and things they audit through there. But yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I know, obviously that focus. I think that I'm pretty sure it was the Barbicane when I went through there and Megan and I kind of laughed a little bit about this, had a conversation about there's in an auditing firm, obviously it's a very detailed job. You're looking and reviewing through a lot of things that require a lot of detail, and in their presentation or their presentation and their the information they sent us, there were a lot of issues with even down to like grammar. And the one thing that struck me, there was like a graphic on there of a triangle of the auditing process. And obviously the only reason I picked up on this is because that's what I do for, a living. I am an auditor, but it was upside down. So it almost looked like it did look like the things that you focus most of your time on was the smallest part of the triangle. And then all the other stuff that kind of build off of that were below it, which really didn't make sense to me. And it's, so no, I definitely hear what you're saying, but it's definitely, it's something that, just, I guess, a different perspective for me. But there were, I think there were some issues with, a little bit of the detail that Barbicane company put into their, the information they submitted to us, which was a little bit of an issue for myself.
Yeah, there were some issues where they listed the wrong county, they listed the wrong school district. It was clear that things had been copy and pasted from somewhere else and then not updated correctly. And normally I overlook those kinds of typos and errors and things, but when I'm looking at an auditing firm, I want to really, we're expecting them to pick up every little detail and everything that's wrong and analyze all of our information. And so for me, it concerns me to have that many, errors and things that someone's overlooking and then have them coming in to look at all of our stuff and analyze ours. Now, that being said, I mean, it was, it's a busy season for these companies, and so putting that together and in a short period of time, and maybe it just wasn't their best, but certainly that was something that, as we were reading through, it just kept standing out to us, those kinds of concerns. And both of those companies do have good experience with school districts. Yeah. So it's not like Axelrod doesn't have that experience. I think what Ryan was saying was that he likes to have additional experience too, to bring into it instead of all experience in the same area. But I get your point as well.
Again, the last comment is cost. I really like to see an audit firm come in, especially with my nonprofit, that gives us a cost data point that stays consistent. And the other is doing that. They're just basically saying we're going to hold our costs at 19 grand, whatever the number is, on a yearly basis. I kind of like that. I think that's a progressive way to look at doing audited services. So that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't know. This is just kind of something I've been thinking about tonight while Mr. Dauber's been going through, all the, the expense savings and things like that. Obviously, we had this discussion prior to everything that's going on now. So if you want to have a little more conversation about potentially saving, what is it, $6,800 over the 4 years, maybe that might be something that we have to do now, but I don't know, Dr. Bolton, I don't know your thoughts on that.
As Mr. Dauber and I spoke through this in terms of the recommendation to be made, we still felt comfortable that the 6,800 was worth the piece if there truly was some benefit to the auditing firm, but it's obviously why we bring it before the committee to have discussion to see what other board members feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you. I think it's worth it for the Axelrod. It just with all the changes in our day to day and staying at home, I just I didn't know if anybody else felt that 6,800 would be something that they would want to consider due to the COVID-19 now and everything we're dealing with.
As I said before, I think we should, but money is money. We're always trying to hold the bottom line. So my recommendation was hold the bottom line on the audit numbers.
I think with an audit, it's all about you hope they don't find anything wrong, and if there's nothing wrong, they don't find anything wrong, then the cost doesn't mean anything. But if there's something to find and someone's doing a better job at auditing those books, then that's the difference. So but do other board members want to weigh in and share your thoughts on this? Mrs. Cullen?
Yeah, I was just curious. I'm trying to remember if I was at the last time is really weird right now, but I can't remember if I was at the last finance committee meeting or not, but I thought that I was. Is the expectation that we're going to put this on the board meeting for April to vote on it? Because as with other things like the engineering and attorneys, things of that nature that we decide to hire as a board, I think it would be better to have more time for, at the very least, the whole finance committee, but ideally the whole board, to be able to look at the information maybe in more detail. So I just wanted to know when the expectation was that this would be voted on.
Mr. Daubert, I know that our original plan was to discuss this in March and vote in April so that we had the month that Ms. Cullen is kind of talking about from that standpoint. If I know that we had originally talked about voting in April.
Right.
If the vote waited till May, what would the impact be on the auditing firms in terms of completing the work this summer?
That's my concern is getting this approved so that we are locked into one of the company's schedules for the summer, and that we can indeed meet our needs for the company can meet our needs for getting the work done and getting our financial statements developed and presented to the board in order for us to do our financial reporting to the state. So really the timing is what I'm concerned about, getting on their schedule and basically getting a firm locked in place.
Yeah, I think one thing to consider here with delay, possibly delaying or whenever voting next month or whatever, all these firms are CPA firms, and their auditing branch is a part of that. But I'm sure, I don't want to say for 100% certain, but I would assume that, they work, they have a lot of work, and now with pushing back the tax filing to the June 15th, there may be some resource issues because I'm sure they're used to having the deadline of April 15th for their CPA stuff, and then they can move into auditing, you know, following that, you know, after that. So, you know, that may be pushed back a little bit, and getting on a schedule with, to get them in here to start doing some audits might be a little tricky or a little bit of an issue if it's pushed back, you know, a significant period of time.
So I think I'm hearing that the original plan was to vote in April, but obviously we should not take anything to a vote that the board is not comfortable, that they feel like they've had appropriate time to consider it.
Mhm.
And so I would suggest that people would communicate with myself and Mr. Kraus to let us know in terms of if they feel like they've had the review and the information. If there's other information you need us to send out to you, you do have the review document, obviously Mr. Dahlberg shared, to try to give an overview of the 4 proposals and why we're making the recommendation that we were making. So.
Yeah, I think that would be fine. Our meeting is the 27th.
It's a week from Monday, so we have almost 2 weeks until we meet.
Okay. So, I mean, if everybody could have just a look at all of the information. And again, I apologize if something got lost for me, but, you know, I think it might be worthwhile for everybody to get a good look. It sounds like it's not quite, you know, certain with everybody. So take the 2 weeks and then see if everybody can make a decision.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, so just going back to the thank yous one last time. I know we have a lot of people who are not able to work during this time, but we also have a group of people that are working overtime right now, and we've talked about who those people are with the cabinet and with Diane and her team. And so obviously this was a huge job that landed in Diane's lap and in the cabinet's laps as far as trying to figure out how to get these services to all of the kids. And you know, I think that Penridge is doing a really good job considering everything that landed here very quickly. Also want to thank the IU and Mark Kaufman and his team, because, you know, we had just gotten done saying, you know, well, this fire was a major crisis and, you know, they're working 24/7 really trying to solve this, but it's going to calm down after that. And then the coronavirus hits. So one thing after another, and they've been instrumental in really trying to facilitate information, keep everyone on the same page so decisions could be made countywide with all different perspectives brought into the conversations, you know, because the best decisions get made with more input and feedback from all of the people making those decisions. So I just want to thank all of those people one more time. The next meeting is going to be May 5th. And I will open it up to public comment. If we have any comment from the public.
You're not seeing anyone unmuting.
See anyone?
Nope.
Okay, then I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
All
All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.
You guys have a good night. Stay healthy.